Every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted, and every 9 minutes, that victim is a child. The vast majority of perpetrators will not go to jail or prison. Less than 0.25% of perpetrators will be incarcerated out of all sexual assaults.
Welcome back to Truth and Trauma. As always, before we get started, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that today's conversation covers sensitive and emotional topics. If you need to take a break, skip ahead, or stop listening at any point, please do what's best for you. Your well-being always comes first. I'm Lucy.
And I'm Sylvia. We're so grateful you're here for another important conversation. If you're new to the podcast, this is a space where we shed light on the realities of sexual violence, support survivors, and work toward change.
Today, we're diving into a critical but often overlooked issue: systematic sexual violence. When we talk about sexual violence, we often think of individual cases, stories of survivor incident that makes the news. But there's a bigger issue at play: systematic sexual violence. This isn't just about isolated events, it's about patterns embedded in institution, culture, and structure that allows abuse to continue unchecked. What is a systematic sexual violence?
Systematic sexual abuse. An organized form of sexual abuse frequently involving numerous perpetrators and victims, and used to control, condition, or initiate victims. This type of ritualized abuse may be repeated frequently and perpetrated under the guise of a spiritual expression or initiation into a gang or other secret or selective group.
To break it down, systematic sexual violence is when police, power dynamics, and social norms create conditions where sexual violence is tolerated, ignored, or even facilitated. For example, systematic sexual violence can happen in workplaces, school, religious institutions, the military, prison, and even in legal systems designed to protect people. It thrives in an environment where survivors are silenced, abusers are protected, and justice is often out of reach.
Some of these examples are sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is defined by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPA, of 2000 as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for a commercial sex act, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. Though, I have to add, it is not limited to people under the age of 18. Anyone can be sex trafficked, and it is an issue should be taken very seriously.
And prostitution. Prostitution is the act of exchanging sexual services for money, goods, or other benefit. While some may engage in prostitution by choice, many are driven by poverty, coercion, trafficking, or abuse. Because of this, prostitution is often connected to systematic sexual exploitation and violence.
And it can also include child abuse. Child sexual abuse is when offenders, could be another child, a young person, or an adult, overt physical or emotional aggression, force, trickery, bribery, and or blackmail to coerce a child into sexual contact.
Common abuse include incest, sexual abuse that is committed by one family member against another by a parent, sibling, other family members, or an unrelated person living with or treated as part of the family. And grooming, someone builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child or young person so that they can manipulate, exploit, and abuse them.
Before we start with our questions, let's let our guests introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves, such as who you are, what you do, and a bit about your background.
Hello, ladies. My name is Terry Grice. I'm the sheriff of Medina County and I've only been the sheriff a little over 4 years. This is my first term. Before that, I was a police officer for Montville Township and then left there after 20 years as the police chief. So again, I've just been here a little over 4 years, and I have Captain Moores with me, so I'll turn it over to him.
Good afternoon. My name is Captain Eric Boers. I'm with the Medina County Sheriff's Office. Been in law enforcement for about 25 years. Been fortunate enough to work on the road, Work in the courthouse. I did some work with Civil Division, Transport Division. I was on the SWAT team for a while. I also did some undercover work working in narcotics for about 6 or 7 years.
That was personally, in my opinion, a very interesting beginning because you had a lot of background and lots of work field area. So personally, I think that was pretty nice. To start off, can you tell us a little about what role the sheriff's department plays when it comes to handling sexual violence cases? Because previously we've talked to Ashley and Dr. Kwalik and Mrs. Davison, and I believe they said that they're from the Children's Center and they often work with police departments and law enforcement about regarding of like sexual violence cases, especially when it comes to children.
The Medina County Sheriff's Office obviously has jurisdiction throughout the whole county. However, we partner with city police departments, township police departments, and village police departments. So crimes that occur in those different jurisdictions sometimes will be handled by them. It all depends on if they're asking for our assistance. The majority of our calls for service involving things like this will happen in the unincorporated portions of the county and the township. So from there, the complaint is received. Sometimes the deputy sheriff will be the first to respond to that. Sometimes it'll be a detective that's called out almost immediately. Almost on all occasions, the detective bureau will handle any in-depth investigations for our agency. So most sexual assault crimes will be done with a detective. Primarily one will be assigned to that case. And from there, they will begin processing crime scenes, interviewing victims, possibly interviewing suspects, and then obviously begin the investigation at step one and follow it through from there.
So in our last interview, I had a really big interest in the mental health of those working with cases because I know it takes a lot mentally to deal with these types of things. Like 911 operators, they have to be very strong-minded, and it takes a lot mentally to deal with these types of things. And so when you deal with these types of cases, how does it affect you?
Well, I think you're right, that it's hard to get away from cases, right? That it's naturally they become a part of you and you take them to heart. So with that, something that we've started at the sheriff's office and we're very proud of is annually all of our employees, dispatchers, our corrections officers, our deputies, detectives, civilian staff, go and they get a mental wellness check, which is just a 1-hour opportunity to speak with a counselor about anything they want, whether it's a stress at work, stress at home, anything. We've also started a peer-to-peer program, so we have other employees that can talk to their team members to go through difficult times. And I think that's very helpful because sometimes it's hard to go home when your significant other doesn't realize what you're investigating or what you're dealing with. So sometimes it's easier to have that dialogue with someone that is directly a part of it or has experienced that. So we're very proud of the fact that we're pretty proactive. Wouldn't you say, Cap?
Yes, I agree. 25 years in law enforcement, for a very long period of time, nobody thought about stuff like that on that side of things for the law enforcement officer themselves, the dispatcher, because it takes a toll on you. And everybody's different. Some people go home and want to share things with family members. Some choose to not go home and burden them with them types of things. I know personally there are things that I would not go home and share with my wife no matter what. Maybe, some things, yes. Other things I just felt like, there's no sense in burdening her with such a thing as well. So, but speaking off what the sheriff said, with that once a year, I initially, admittedly, was reluctant and was kind of like an old school thought process where I'm not so sure I want to do something like this, but I actually went in there and found it to be very, very awesome. I actually look forward to it now every year. The individual I go to, I think he's just an incredible man. And I've actually gotten a lot out of it. So I think that has actually definitely helped a lot from that side of things.
So just another question from me personally. Is there any bias that you guys have when you're assigned to certain sexual violence case? So for example, you know how there is often bias against male victims who are sexually assaulted? Well, in most society or culture, people think, oh, they're men, they can't be assaulted, or like they can't be as affected as a female victim. So, do you think there is any bias you guys personally have when you went into certain cases?
Absolutely not. When any type of case came across my desk, you have to have an open mind. I always have taught other people and told other individuals who are starting detective type work, you go into a situation, and unfortunately in this line of work, you always, to protect yourself and the case, think worst case scenario, and then you work back from there. But no, it does not matter whether it's a male, a female, what race the individual is. None of that's relevant whatsoever. If you have a victim that's come forward and has filed a complaint about a sexual assault, any type of crime, they all have to be addressed exactly the same way.
So, can you tell us some of the first steps law enforcement takes when it comes to reporting sexual violence? And then can you tell us some of your experience and what are some of the biggest challenges law enforcement face when investigating these cases?
The basic steps, I mean, obviously, is that the victim comes forward. Then obviously the investigation is begun. Again, interviews are conducted with victims, possible suspects, possible witnesses. Crime scenes, if available, are processed. We're looking for physical evidence if possible. A lot of times, unfortunately, these types of crimes take place, and there'll be a period of time that goes by, and unfortunately, it kind of gets us as a law enforcement agency behind the eight ball. An example would be a sexual assault takes place. We'll use a female for example, and it occurs at, let's say it's at a house, there's a party going on or something, and this doesn't surface for a day or two. You've now had a lot of people go in and out of that bedroom. The victim has probably changed clothes, showered, washed clothes, so you lose a lot of physical evidence that can be used in the prosecution of that case going forward. A lot of times the victims have feelings of embarrassment. Sometimes they even feel like it's their fault that this has happened. So that's sometimes why they fail to come forward as soon as possible. Obviously, the trauma of the assault itself, an immediate reaction in a lot of the victims, unfortunately, is to get rid of those clothes and take a shower because they feel like they've been obviously dirty. They're dirty. They want to get clean. So that obviously, of course, affects the case going forward as well. When you bring them individuals in, you just have to use what you have in front of you and do the best investigation you can. I will tell you, I know that one of your questions, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but is does it create problems with prosecution when you don't have physical evidence? Of course it does. However, you do not have to have physical evidence to go forward with the prosecution. Obviously, it becomes more of a victim's word against the suspect's word when it gets to trial. But the physical evidence is obviously key in these types of investigations. It helps enormously with the prosecution and the conviction of the alleged offender.
I would also like to add that when the victim comes in specifically to the sheriff's office, we have a specific interview room where we call it the soft interview room. So it's not where other suspects go. It's a very room that's trying to be calming because it is a very traumatic situation. So we're trying to remove barriers and stresses as best we can, similar to what the Children's Center does for juveniles.
So I know Sylvia has a question to ask, but before I let her ask her question, to my information, I know there is this thing known as a rape kit. Is that usually used immediately after sexual assault, or is there something that you should know before using it or like after using it, or like can you still use it after like a day or so after the sexual violence? Because I know you said that once a day or so after, usually the victim washes off all evidence off of their body and whatnot. So I would just like to know what exactly a rape kit does.
Good question. So those are actually conducted by a professional at the hospital. The law enforcement agent does not do that. The victim does not do that for themselves. If there's any thought that anything can be begotten from the rape kit itself, they are performed. The law enforcement officer usually will go to the hospital. The victim will go to the hospital and meet with what's called a SANE nurse. It is a a procedure where they physically inspect the victim, and then the kit consists of trying to retrieve any type of physical evidence from the victim, whether that be DNA, bodily fluids, anything like that. In the case where there is some type of allegation of possibly some type of, say, being drugged or something like that, they can also do actually a blood test or a urinalysis, and then that will determine what could possibly be in the victim's bloodstream prior to the assault. So there is no time frame on those. Most times we will do those no matter what, because if you don't get nothing, you don't get nothing. But if there's an outside chance that there is some type of evidence still there, it's obviously always beneficial to be able to go ahead and get that.
Cap, can you add that that's normally done here in the county at Cleveland Clinic?
Yes.
So
yes.
that's been a change, so now we're able to have the same nurses locally instead of having victims travel to Cuyahoga County or Summit County.
Very good point, because again, this is a traumatizing situation, probably one of the worst things that can happen to a human being, and it did used to be, it's another 45-minute drive possibly to Cleveland or Akron area. Then those hospitals were so large, sometimes the victim would be there and have to wait an extensive amount of time. So that has definitely increased the productivity of getting those things done much quicker.
Thank you so much for that. Now let Sylvia ask her questions.
So, what would you recommend to people who think they can't report something happening because of something else that they or someone else was doing at the time, such as something illegal like drinking or wanting someone they know to not get in trouble? Like if there was a party or something happening and they know someone there was doing something that they shouldn't have, and they don't want to report something happening to them because at the same time other things were happening that shouldn't have been happening.
I'll start us off here and then hand it over to Captain Boris, but I think the initial thing is their well-being needs to be paramount, right? If there was underage drinking, not that we're saying that's okay, but that's not the main priority of these cases. The main priority of these cases is to investigate for sexual assault and make sure that we're really taking care of the victim's well-being and providing a pathway to healing and a pathway to prosecution. So that really is the forefront of our mindset.
I couldn't say it better. Immediately, I would tell the individual, quite honestly, whatever else was going on is irrelevant at this point. What's most important now is you making sure that you are okay and making sure that we can get this investigation and prosecute the individual who committed whatever offense was committed.
I know there's also this confidentiality thing where you can't really disclose a lot of like specific details, but I'm kind of curious as to, is there any common barriers that prevent survivors from seeking help that you've seen in the community, or maybe not even just here, but like maybe things you've heard of, something like that, in cases where like usually the perpetrators are usually someone who knows the victim. So in cases where a survivor and the offender know each other, like in the dating violence or family cases, how does that affect the investigation? Because we know there could be very biased witnesses as well, like parents be like, oh, he's my son, he couldn't have done it, or like aunts and uncles be like, well, he or she is always been like that, they're just exaggerating, the victim isn't really saying the truth. How can that affect the investigation?
It makes it much more difficult, to be honest. I have actually unfortunately experienced all of what you just said. I have had instances where a stepfather sexually assaulted a stepchild. Unfortunately, it took a lot of work and investigation. The mother just did not want to accept that. She was in a lot of denial. It was an actual case. It was not just an allegation. The individual did get prosecuted for it. So when you run into situations like that, it does hamper the investigation. It also creates problems there at the home because in most situations like that, the CAC is going to get involved, and whatever parent is the suspect is going to be removed from that home. So now not only is the child dealing with what happened, But now you've got a separation of parents. The family has been broken up. It creates a lot more of a family dynamic that creates just more stress for everybody involved, quite honestly. So that definitely does hamper the investigation at times. I have had a case where up through prosecution, and really, really good evidence that the spouse continued to not want to admit that it had happened. So no matter what was discovered and what was presented during the course of the trial, that individual just never, ever wanted to believe. They're just in complete denial. So that does create problems. As far as the first part of your question, I think there's a very common denominator with a lot of the victims. There is always a level of embarrassment. The individual feels, embarrassed about what happened, and there's also sometimes they feel shame, and that limits them from wanting to come forward. Unfortunately, we know for a fact that there are a lot of individuals who have been sexually assaulted that just did not want to come forward because they did not want to go through with that process. But to get them to want to cooperate, I will give you another good example. I actually have a detective at the sheriff's office now that had a sexual assault case somewhat recently, and the individual was a juvenile, and she did not want to come forward. She did not want to speak. However, the family knew about it. That detective came up with a very good idea and knew that she had a very, very good close cousin, and went to their residence with that cousin and her parents, and they actually spoke with that young girl for about an hour to an hour and a half about everything else other than what had happened to warm up to that particular juvenile. That juvenile then got comfortable enough to start speaking about what had happened with my detective, and subsequently the case was prosecuted and the individual ended up getting sentenced to quite a significant sentence. So that was one thing that they've been able to do to kind of help victims come forward.
I also think sometimes for the family, parents feel guilty, so they deny it because they think to themselves, why didn't I pick up on this warning sign? Why didn't I see this? Why did I let my son or daughter alone? And so that guilt basically manifests into denial, and they have to get over that guilt in order to basically accept what has occurred and then move forward with, like I said, the son or daughter for healing.
Back when my sister was in high school, I know that they used to offer a free self-defense class for seniors, and I'm not sure I can't remember if it was just for women or not, but I just wanted to know if they still offer it, and how would someone access that class?
Medina County Sheriff's Office does not currently have that class, but we are in the process of developing it. However, Medina City Police Department and Montville Township have the class, and I know specifically for both, they'll put it on Facebook, and normally it's towards the beginning of the school, like college. So when ladies are going to college, the class will be sometime in the late or mid-summer. And when I was at Montville, we received excellent feedback, and I know Medina City does too. It's just a great class to have. Take sexual assaults out of it. It's just a good class to have for that mental mindset, when you're going on a college campus or truthfully anywhere. It's very helpful.
I know that there's, like she said, there's confidentiality, but is there a particular case that sticks with you? And if you can't get into detail, that's okay, but is there a reason why it stuck with you?
So I immediately had a case come to mind. I was a detective, and I had responded to a call of a female who had alleged she'd been sexually assaulted in actually a park bathroom, and it was wintertime, and it was very late at night. I responded and worked the case. It bothered me. It hit close to home for some reason, and I was really working at trying to find the suspect. She alleged that it was a stranger, so that made things more difficult. I continued to investigate the case. It was wintertime, so the park was essentially closed. There was nobody there. The water wasn't running in the bathrooms because of obviously freezing temperatures. And things weren't just adding up. And to make the story a little bit shorter, ultimately what ended up happening was it was an absolute false allegation. It had taken weeks, but finally, after interviewing her, a lot of her story started to not add up, and it obviously set me back quite a ways because I was, of course, getting other cases, and to be doing everything that I was doing, then to find out that she unfortunately was suffering from some mental illness. That was the basis for why she made this allegation, but it really created a lot of havoc for quite some time. So those types of situations unfortunately do happen, and that's one of the things that also makes some of these cases difficult because unfortunately sometimes people do make false accusations or allegations and something hasn't happened, and then that's obviously very difficult for law enforcement to work around. So that was a case that and that happened a long time ago, and I still remember it very vividly. So it was a little bit of a rougher one.
Any cases that involve children always stick with me, and especially when they're perpetrated by a grandparent or obviously a parent, because those are the individuals that the child looks up to and respects and wants protection from. And I think Cap would say the same. When you get those cases, it might not be a very violent, but obviously we know the trauma and the mental anguish that those children suffer, and it's really critical that they get that help at an early age. So anytime we have the cases with children, it definitely has an impact and sticks with you for sure.
So, what about like alcohol or drug facilitated sexual assault? So, we've done a little research of our own, and usually, like drug or alcohol facilitated sexual assault isn't. There is obviously drug and alcohol sexual violence. Have you guys come across any of those, or is there any like generational violence that you guys have come across that might have been like involved with drugs and alcohol? For example, like a father who drinks abuses his child, and the child ends up like being in that generational cycle where they end up drinking and where they end up abusing the child, something like that.
So yes, unfortunately, when children are sexually assaulted, there's a just a huge amount of things that occur to that poor child. As the sheriff already said, the child looks at the parents or to that adult as someone who's supposed to be protecting them, and then they're being actually assaulted by them. So that then they just automatically now they don't trust anybody anymore going forward in life. So and we unfortunately do see a lot of children are physically abused, sexually assaulted. They do grow up using, unfortunately, drugs or alcohol because it's a way that they deal with, cope with. It's a coping mechanism, a very unhealthy way, but it does occur. I think again, as a society as a whole, recently over recent years, we've gotten a lot better with trying to get help for these folks. A long time ago, there weren't so many programs. There weren't so many things that we knew to try to address, to try to help them as best as we can with the counselors and doctors and even law enforcement getting involved. There's a lot more of a success rate now, but unfortunately, yes, you do see some of that spill over. There's no doubt we see a child raised in a certain type of home where mom or dad have been committing crimes their whole lives. Yes, there's a high percentage that individual is going to probably grow up and do the same thing, and we unfortunately do see dad in jail in a significant amount of times, and then years later, son turns 18, and then the son ends up in jail as well for committing crimes. So unfortunately, that does sometimes continue generationally. Yes. So I will tell you that I personally have never had a case where somebody was actually given any type of narcotic to where they passed out and was assaulted. I will tell you that a large amount of my cases, the suspect is almost always under the influence of drugs and/or alcohol. It lends to that bad judgment. Or obviously they already have some type of issues if they're obviously committing these types of crimes, but the alcohol or the drug sometimes is a catalyst for the individual. More often than not, they are under the influence of something when the assaults are taking place.
I've actually done the research on this, and it says here in my little research tablet that says sexual violence survivor also shows an increased likelihood of becoming re-victimized. Have you ever met someone who has become a victim like repeatedly of the like sexual violence? It might not be the same person, but have they become like a victim again and again?
Unfortunately, yes. One just very recently. The individual stated they were sexually assaulted as a juvenile, and then was also joined the military, and there was an incident where they were sexually assaulted there as well. So I have seen that. I've not read enough about it to know to speak intelligently on just exactly why that would happen, but I do know that there is a large number out there as well, far too many of people who have been sexually assaulted more than once. Unfortunately, some are sexually assaulted for periods of time by family members or distant family members, and before they come forward, it just takes place for extended periods of time. So yes, that does take place.
So, what happens to those who have been falsely accused and sent to jail or prison and they ended up getting out because it was a false accusation? So, like, if they were in prison or jail for a long time or even just a little bit of time, what happens to those who went to jail and what happens to those who made the accusation?
So unfortunately, obviously, we're seeing that as well. With the advent of DNA, it has really cut back on that. Unfortunately, you do read on a somewhat regular basis of an individual who was wrongfully incarcerated. Matter of fact, I just read one recently, about a week or so ago, where a gentleman was in jail for almost 20 years. And he was actually exonerated, and actually they caught the actual suspect via DNA. Unfortunately, there is just not a whole lot that can be done for that individual. My assumption is that there probably is some type of litigation or lawsuit type issue that takes place after that. But unfortunately, the time that that individual spent incarcerated, there's really not a whole lot you can do to get that back. So again, going forward, I think our investigative habits and skills have gotten better as law enforcement has moved through the years, and we're much more cautious with making sure that we don't run into a situation where we're falsely accusing or putting somebody in prison or jail that has not committed a crime. But DNA has been absolutely positively a blessing to be able to help not do those types of things with cases.
Your second part of that was what happens to the alleged victim. If it's truly a victim that doesn't know the identity, maybe they were unable to identify someone, I can understand that. But if it's someone that made that allegation knowingly that someone did not perpetrate that crime, I know that they have been held accountable, and rightfully so. Right? You just mentioned 20 years in prison. That could be a quarter of someone's life. So that is a very serious charge, and those are things that obviously, no matter if it's male or female, should definitely be held accountable.
What should someone do if they suspect that someone they know is experiencing abuse or violence of any kind?
Well, let's start if it's someone that's still living at home with parents. They need to confide in parents or close friends, or vice versa. If the friends suspect that, they need to approach their friend and speak up and say, hey, we're noticing some changes, whether it's physically, by they're not social, or that social aspect. Speak up, be a good friend, go for help. If it's an adult, the same premise applies, but you need to have the courage, which I'm sure is so difficult, but to make that phone call to law enforcement, wherever you are. And hopefully you have a confidant or someone you can truly trust that will walk through the process with you. In Medina County, we have a lot of resources here. Hope and Healing, the Children's Center if you're a juvenile. Job and Family Services has programs. So it really takes a real good social network to rally around someone that's been victimized of this, to have that structure in place.
So previously in our other episode, we did talk about the rise of social media and how that has affected sexual violence cases. So do you know since you guys are experts, I personally want your personal opinion on what you think what you think social media has done for sexual violence cases. Because from what I've seen, because I'm on TikTok a lot, because once again, I do not have a life. I see a lot of cases where people come forward with their sexual violence cases. They're like, oh, I've been assaulted by this person before. And then there's other people coming forward in their comment section. They're like, you know what? I've been actually assaulted by the same person, or I've had a similar story to this where I've been assaulted by someone else. And there's a lot of people who are sending support, but there's also a bit of con to it because there are also people who are falsely, as you guys have said before, falsely accusing others of sexual assaulting them, even though something like that hasn't happened. So, can you tell us a bit about your personal opinion?
So I will tell you that social media has definitely has made these types of things a much significant more problem. Um, Social media is great that you can use it for the right things. Unfortunately, we do have individuals out there who are sexual predators. The thing that we really see that has spiked a lot since social media has gotten bigger and bigger, and there becomes more of it, is obviously individuals who are preying on children. The child pornography, the ability to have cell phones, to be on videos, to be sending videos back and forth, video games that are being live streamed over Wi-Fi. These individuals are posing as other children when it's a 50. I'm just going to throw something out there. A 50-year-old man who has got serious problems and is seeking out children. So we do see those cases, and they do use social media sometimes, unfortunately, for bad things. Because there's so much social media, law enforcement has to work quickly, because when we do get these complaints that come in, because things move so fastly with text messages, for example, individuals start preying on somebody and they're sending something via text message, and then it's erased. We've only got a certain amount of time before we can get that back from whatever network it would be, whether it be Verizon or AT&T. Same thing goes with Facebook. To get preservation records filed, there's a crime committed on one of them social media sites, that stuff goes away very quickly. And sometimes the social media doesn't want to cooperate with law enforcement. It all just depends. So to answer your question, yes, we have seen social media used as a weapon for sexual assault type things, and posing as people that they're not children. And again, the child pornography, unfortunately, is very predominant on social media and via a lot of these games that you can now stream, like using VR sets and things like that. We're seeing a lot of that taking place as well.
Regarding someone posting that on social media, I could see if the case is finalized and they're posting basically to encourage other victims to come forward and report that, or they're looking for assistance. But if the case hasn't even been reported to law enforcement, I personally believe they should tell law enforcement before they're putting this all over social media. As Cap said, social media can be good, social media can be bad. I think the four of us in this room probably understand that. There are some people that use it for a lot of negative things, so we just have to be mindful of that.
So obviously there's thousands upon thousands of movies and shows regarding any type of law enforcement. And obviously they're overdone and dramatized most of the time. How realistic can these cases that they portray be? And do you think that they can have an influence on people, whether it's good or bad?
I will tell you that almost everything you see in movies is pure fiction. A lot of things people see in movies and TV shows, it actually makes our job more difficult, because somebody watches, believe it or not, there are a lot of people out there, and I'm talking about adults, who will watch a TV show and they think that a crime can be solved in an hour. Some of the things that you see on those shows that they do with evidence and how they solve crimes, is completely fictional. So I have had people many a times ask me, why is this taking so long? And you have to explain to them and make sure they understand the everything you have to do, and that when we get evidence sometimes and send it out to the Attorney General's office, sometimes it's weeks, if not months, before we even get results back. So a lot of times that will fall out of law enforcement's hands altogether. You can be waiting on all kinds of other different entities to get things that you need for that case. So I will tell you that, yes, a lot of that stuff that you see in the movies and on the television shows is for pure entertainment purposes. Most things in real life investigations do not typically pan out the way you see them on those types of shows.
Sylvia, I think your question's an interesting question. I think some of the violence depicted in that is come from real life, unfortunately, cases, right? That we've all seen in the news. But I absolutely 100% agree with what the captain said. The solvability and the timeline is so inaccurate. A lot of times, you'll solve an entire case in a 60-minute show, right? It's just not going to happen in real world. And as he said, that puts law enforcement behind the 8 ball, because then victims might feel slighted by us. Like, what is taking so long? As he said, it's all about the timelines that are outside of our control. We can't control all of those. But I think your question's a good one, because I think other people also ask that or wonder that themselves. So that was a good last question there, Sylvia.
So as we're coming to the end of our time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Unfortunately, without Judge Collier. This has been such an important and eye-opening conversation, and we just want to give out a huge thank to obviously our sheriff and our captain. What you guys have said really gives a little peek into all the behind-the-scene works in police departments. I'm sure Sylvia has something else to say.
I am glad that both of you guys could come. I definitely got my questions answered, and I'm glad that they were answered, because especially with the movies and TV shows, because I like to watch a lot of law enforcement TV, and I know that, yeah, it is overdone, but we do really appreciate both of you guys taking the time to share your knowledge and perspectives with us.
Thank you for having
All
us.
right, ladies, have a great day.
Thank you so much. We hope to see you around.
Before we wrap up, we want to remind everyone that support is always available. If you or someone you know has been affected by sexual violence, please don't hesitate to reach out to the resources we've listed in the description. You are not alone. There is help and hope out there.
And if you know someone who's been impacted, please don't stay silent. Be there for them. Help them find support and speak up if they can't. It's so important that we stand with survivors and make sure they get the help they deserve.
Always remember, we are here to break the chain and end the pain.